Well, thank you, Lucy. So yes, I'm Jeff Stabler, and I have been here at the school on staff for 22 years. In the past 2 years, I've been serving here in the capacity of the Director of Biblical and Worldview Studies. And that has allowed me to pursue some kind of interesting things. And last year, one of the things that I really kind of chased down more in the secondary was how our secondary students in particular were using technology. And it was really interesting to me to be able to sit down and hear from them. So there were a lot of class interviews that I did. We surveyed the whole student body. That broke down even into some one-on-one interviews and group interviews. And out of that, I was able to get a little bit of a picture for what's going on in terms of our high school students with technology. It was really, really fascinating and eye-opening for me. What was really interesting was to see the degree to which they were self-reflective on the way that they were using technology, way more than I anticipated. And so some of the things that I'm going to share with you tonight have flow out of what I learned from them, and I think you'll see some of the connections. But when we think about technology, what we're really thinking about is mobile technology, right? The smartphone, the iPad, that type of thing. And I really believe that we are at one of those inflection points in human history where things have changed and they will never be the same again. If you think about what the smartphone has done to change the world, it's unbelievable. It's changed the way that people do commerce, obviously changed the way that communication happens. We talk about just how the world has shrunk, and people are able to connect across the globe in ways that we could never have dreamed of before. There have been other key inflection points like that in the past historically, but the difference between this one and those is that this has happened over such a short period of time. Really 10, maybe 11 years that we're talking about this massive revolution. You think back to something like the printing press, and that was a massive shift in human history and the way that people were able to communicate. It took years and years and years before books were widespread, and even to this day there are places that don't have access to books. Think even in our own country, something as simple as the automobile. That revolutionized things. And it took our culture forward in a way that we can't go back. If you were to come on a horseback tonight, it would be difficult for you, right? We just can't go back. But the transition from horse and buggy to automobile, again, happened over decades. And as a result of that, when those kinds of transitions happened, there was time to reflect on what was happening, to think about it, to see how it was affecting us, and to maybe make some adjustments along the way. We really haven't had that luxury with this kind of revolution, have we? And I don't know if you're like me, I love technology. And so when something new comes out, you want to get it right away if you can and use it. But I think only recently, in the past really, as I've been watching the culture 3 or 4 years, have we begun to seriously consider what is this doing to us? And we need to think about that. And as a result of that, here at the school, we're entering into this dialogue with you. Now, because we're a Christian school, we have the benefit of being able to go to the Bible and say, what does the Bible say about technology? And I think this is really important that we get this right in our thinking. The Bible actually does have something to say about technology, even though it was a book that was written 2,000 years ago. The Lord knows. And when we look at the Scriptures, we see something to me that's very, very interesting. The Scriptures begin in a garden. And in that garden, Adam and Eve were told by God to do something. They were told to cultivate the garden. And I think in that simple command, we see that there would inevitably arise out of that the development of technology. I mean, we're surely not to believe that Adam was to dig around with his hands for the rest of his life. No, God intended that Adam, made in his image, would do what God had just done. If you're reading through Genesis, God had just created the whole universe. And then he creates Adam in his image, and he is also to create and to make and to cultivate. And implied in that is the development of technology. So here's what that tells me. Technology is a good thing. In fact, I would emphasize this even more because when we fast forward to the end, to the culmination of all of history, we see this beautiful scene at the end of Revelation where there's this new Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven from God. Now just let your mind wander for a minute and think about all the technology implied in a city, right? It's not a return to a garden. It's not simple tools. No, it's a huge advancement. Here's what that tells me. That technology is something that is not neutral, it's good. It's a good gift. And as followers of Christ, we want to use technology in such a way that it would bring glory to Him. That's our goal with our children. Our goal is not to keep technology from them. Rather, what we want to do is to teach them to use technology with courage and with wisdom for God's glory. Now, we know that in between the garden and the city, that there is a lot of brokenness, right? And so the other thing that we know about technology is that even though it's a good thing, it's a broken thing. And so we have to think through what that means for us. Maybe we could think about it by thinking about a very primitive form of technology, a shovel. Now, even though this is a primitive form of technology, you can change your environment drastically by using a shovel. So I found this out one day when my son, he's in 8th grade now, but he was 5. He was getting a little crazy around the house. I thought, brilliant idea, this dad idea. Here's your shovel, go have some fun. Well, I really didn't anticipate what he could actually do with that shovel. I look out the window, he's below the surface of the ground, dirt's flying up, there's a hole about as big as one of these tables or maybe bigger. What have you done in my yard? He was able to change his environment drastically with this simple piece of technology. But the technology also worked on him. When I looked at his little hands, he had blisters. The next day, he was actually a little sore from using that technology. And I think that's a general principle of life, that the tools that we use also affect us. And I think you could probably see where I'm going with this. What are our tools doing to us? Now, the shovel's a physical tool, so the effects are going to be physical. A phone, most of what happens in the non-physical realm, doesn't it? So that leads to a really interesting question. What is that shaping about us? And so, tonight, one of the things that we want to do is to get you guys together to see that we are in this together. We really need each other. Like I said, the smartphone developed over such a short period of time. We can't go ask mom and dad how they handled the smartphone when we were kids, because it wasn't there. And so we need each other to think through this. So, to give us just a little bit of an experience to do that tonight, around your table, I want you to answer this question, okay? In what ways do you see technology shaping you or your children? So take a minute just around your table, get to know somebody if you don't already, and answer that question. Okay, I know that wasn't very long. I'm probably cutting you off mid-sentence here. But let me just make an observation. We've gone 5 for 5 on this. This is our 5th meeting, and every group has jumped right into that question. There hasn't been a single group where they've kind of looked around like, never really thought about how it could possibly be doing. No, in fact, I have to cut it off every time because there's so many things, so many ways that it's shaping us, some good, maybe some not so good. Anyone brave enough to share something that they just immediately think of, I know how it's changing me? Yes, ma'am.
I think that we used to look at technology when the internet first came out, I'm older than the majority of you in this room, as information. I look at it now as knowledge, but knowledge that we have to monitor.
Okay, did you all hear that? She says we used to look at it as information, but now it's knowledge that we have to monitor. And yeah, absolutely. It's amazing what is accessible. We had a math teacher the other day. They were graphing some stuff, and they were supposed to match temperatures with climates. And there was a cold temperature that was actually supposed to be matched with a desert. the kids were kind of scratching their head. What? Does it get cold in the desert? And she said, well, let's just check. And all of a sudden, they all are looking, and they have pictures of where it's cold in the desert and charts and graphs just like that, right? So that changes the way that we teach. It changes the way that we access information. Somebody else was going to share something.
Similar line. It's been great because when she asked questions about what is this animal, well, I'm trying to describe it. God only knows what it is. It's like actuality, but now you can Google it.
Yeah.
It's there, you can watch a video, you can read all about it.
Right. We have a verb, Google it, right? It's new. So yeah, that changes things. It changed the way that we expect things to be, to happen. The pace is so quick. You ever have an Amazon Prime package not get there in 2 days? That's just like ridiculous. We have really been, I mean, you just think back what it was like, 10 years ago, and we have changed tremendously. So how do we think about this? Well, I want to go to a helpful metaphor that I think might walk us through how to think about technology and how we help our children to use technology well. And it's this: driving a car. This is something that we hope, I think, that all of our children will one day do. Like, you hope that your kids, I was just talking with you earlier about the possibility of our children driving a car. We want them to do that, right? It's something that we hope one day they'll get there. But we're really not interested in this, right? This would be no good. Instead, we have inherited a process that our culture, it's just a given. We don't even think about it, right? If you're 14, you're not driving. You're 15, you can get your learner's permit. We've inherited that. We don't think twice about it. And I think there's something there that we can use to compare how we introduce our children to technology. It's not that we're keeping them from it, but how do we introduce it with wisdom? So here's kind of the process. You remember that day when you took your child home for the first time and trying to get that car seat just right and get the little ball in the level and how you drove home, right? Remember that? And then after a year, we turn them around so that they can see out, and that's an exciting time for us and for them, and they're kind of kicking their feet more and they can see. And then they graduate to the car seat, and then from there, we get this, where the one kid gets to sit in the middle and bother his sister because he's not encumbered like she is. And then before they drive, they do a lot of this, right? They sit in the back and critique our driving. Anyone had a child tell you how to drive? They know. You didn't stop, Dad, right? And so we want to think about what are the connections there. As we're introducing technology to our children, what are they seeing with us? What are they learning from the way that we use technology? Just like they learn a lot about what driving should look like by watching us drive. I came across these images. I'm just going to let these kind of come up. Looks ridiculous, doesn't it? But I wonder, what will our children think about the way that we're using technology? One of my discussions that I had with high school students was how they are frustrated with the way that their parents use technology. I was a little surprised about how intense they were actually about that. Sherry Turkle is a researcher at MIT, and she's done a lot of study on this. And what she has observed is that the mere presence of a phone on a table changes the types and kinds of conversations that people have. I really was able to confirm that with my students. So a group of 9th grade girls, I asked them about, what kinds of things might you talk about differently if your mom has her phone out or she doesn't? And they said, well, if mom's got her phone out, I'm probably not going to talk about anything serious because I know she's just going to get interrupted. I had a senior boy, and this is what really shocked me. He said, I hate it when we go out to eat. Why? Because mom, dad, everybody's on the phone, and they just sit there and look at it while I chew my food. And usually you would think if a senior boy wouldn't care that much. It really bothered him. And so I think it's a question that we have to ask ourselves first before we even think about what we're doing with our kids in technology is, what are they learning from us? What are we teaching them about how to use technology? Well, if we continue this metaphor out, eventually the goal is, again, to get them using technology, but to do it incrementally. And so just like with driving, there may be a student driving phase where we're alongside them, and then eventually comes this glorious day where you hand off the keys and off they go. But even then, we're not just going to say off they go, right? We still want to know where they're going, and we're going to have some rules and regulations and things like that for them. Now, this is easy enough because this is just second nature. We don't even think about it or question it anymore. We've inherited this from our culture. What does this look like with technology, though? And that's where it gets a little more complicated. You know, what corresponds to the car carrier? What corresponds to the booster seat, or the kid sitting by himself, or the student driver, or leaving the nest, so to speak? Now, I will say this. I believe that the phone is at the end of this. Not the laptop, it's the phone. The phone is handing off the keys, because you can do way more with a phone than you can anything else. Now, when I look at this is going to have to look different for different families. I look at my own children, my son who's in 8th grade. I don't know that I've really told him he can't have social media because he doesn't want it. I could tell him right now, you can do whatever you want. He's like, why? He just doesn't care. If I told him you can play as much video games as you want, I probably wouldn't see him again, right? I'd have to pull him out of his room because he loves doing that. My daughter, who's coming up, it's going to be different with her. So even within your family, you have to think a little bit differently about how you're going to do this. But before we just sort of reflexively make our plan here, I do want to give you a few cautions, okay? So here's one. I asked a group of experts, should a 6th grader have a smartphone? And this may surprise you here. The answer was 95% said no, I don't think a 6th grader should have a smartphone. Now you're saying, okay, who are these experts? These were my senior boys from last year. Blew me away. I asked them this question, really wasn't intending that this was where I was going. It was one of those questions you feed them to get to the stuff you really want to talk about. And I gave them this question, and student after student said no. I said, wait a second, guys. In fact, all of them but 2. So of last year's senior class, graduating senior class, all the boys except for 2 said, I don't think a 6th grader should have a smartphone. I said, guys, you use this stuff all the time. Why are you saying this? And one kid said something that I've never forgotten. He looked at me, he said, Mr. Stabler, I've seen things I can never unsee. Wow. I've seen things I can never unsee. In addition to this, you may recognize this guy. When the iPad came out, he was interviewed by a reporter, and they asked him all kinds of questions about the iPad. The last question just kind of threw to him, thought it would be a fun question. They said, I bet your kids love the iPad. You know what his response was? They haven't used it. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. Isn't that interesting? And that's reflective of a growing trend in Silicon Valley. This New York Times article came out not too long ago, and it explores how many high-level Silicon Valley executives do not allow their own children to use technology. In fact, there was another article that came out right about the same time as this one, exploring how nannies in San Francisco and Silicon Valley area have to show that they will take care of children without using technology. It's written into their contracts. What does that tell us if the people who are producing these things feel that it could have a damaging effect on their own children? Well, I think as Christians, we're able to look at this. There's sort of 2 poles that happen whenever you don't know how to see things in light of the brokenness of the world. One is you're going to idolize it. The cell phones are great. Everybody should have one. Get them out as quick as you can. The other is you're going to demonize it. But as Christians, we understand the way the world works, that there are good gifts that are broken gifts that need to be redeemed. So it should come as no surprise that technology is a great thing. It's also a broken thing, and it's a thing that we need to redeem. So how do we think about that then? Well, when we look at technology, I think there are 3 different aspects to technology, 3 different ways we use it. Obviously for communication, although we don't talk over the phone as much as we used to, but we use it for communication in lots of important ways. Some of you have been able to introduce your children to their grandparents, and you wouldn't have been able to do that if you didn't have FaceTime. Anybody in that category? You spend time letting them see other people. The other thing that we do with technology is we consume. This, of course, is where some of our concern may initially go. Now, consumption in and of itself is not bad. Again, thinking as a Christian, I consume. I am given God's grace and I extend it out to others. That's a pattern that should be daily. Reading from God's Word, hearing from His people, and then receiving grace and then extending it out. So consuming is not a bad thing, but we know that consuming is a place where we might have some concerns. And then the last thing that we can do, and as a school, this is where it's really exciting to think about what we can do with technology, is the amazing kinds of things that we can create. My son, not long ago, had a catapult project that he did in 8th grade. He was able to communicate with the other boys in his group without being in the same room. They designed this thing together using their devices. They did all the research together. Then they met in person and built it. It was a really cool thing that they were able to do with technology they would not have been able to do, at least not in the same way, if they didn't have it. So all of these things are good, and yet they're broken. And I want us to think a little bit about where we may have some caution on each of these. The first is the idea of consumption. You ever been here? You're watching Netflix, you get to the end, and what happens? Yeah. And you've got about 15 seconds to decide, how lazy am I? Before the next one rolls, right? And how often have we got suckered into, just one more hour. What'll it hurt me? Think about that. If that's something that we're having difficulty with, how much more will our children? They do not have the capacity to say no. And what's scary is that a lot of the technology that's being developed is increasingly looking to brain science to keep people on their screens. There's a 60-minute documentary that came out not too long ago where they explored this phenomenon. And so these coders are connecting with neuroscientists to think about how can we affect the brain the most so that you'll stay on your device. In that episode, they talked about Instagram. And they said Instagram will hold back likes. They've developed these algorithms to hold back likes. So you post a picture and a bunch of your friends like it. They don't give them to you right away. They hold it back and then they'll give them to you in a flood. And what that does is it creates a little bit of a higher dopamine hit in your brain, and it makes you want to go back and look again. And what's super scary about this is that they're using deep learning, so it's not just a blanket program for everybody. They are monitoring you. So it's recording when you look at stuff, how you look at stuff, and then it tailors the way it delivers information to you so that you will be on it as long as you can. And we can understand why. When we come to maybe a game like Fortnite, anybody heard of Fortnite? Your children probably playing that. Fortnite is the same kind of thing. It went from $1 billion industry to a $16 billion profit in 1 year. Billion to 16 billion in 1 year. Here's what that tells me, and we should talk to our children about this. There's big money behind the apps that we're using. They are not neutral. They are out grabbing us, right? So our children don't have the capacity just to stop. Let me say just a few words about Fortnite. I think there's some positive things here. You have the opportunity to create, collaborate. This is where a lot of kids have good fun, social time. They get together as teams and they're able to talk with each other and play. Some people have even likened this to the modern day skate park where kids used to go and just hang out. I think there's one important difference here though. You can never replace face-to-face communication with online communication. Think about when you were growing up and you played with kids in the neighborhood. Inevitably, there were arguments. Inevitably, there were times where you had to deal with a kid you didn't like so much. With this, what happens when somebody doesn't like what's going on? Click, I'm gone. I don't have to work through the social process of figuring out how do I overcome conflict. That face-to-face interaction can't be replaced. We have to get our children in front of other children to learn how to do that. That's where they learn leadership. That's where they learn character. And that kind of thing is missing in most online forms of communication. And then, of course, we know the really dark side. There's so much evil that just comes at us through our devices. The leading porn site last year, if you were to start watching what was uploaded to their site today and not stop, do it 24 hours a day, it would take you 14 years to watch what was uploaded in 1 year last year. They actually post this statistic very proudly, and other statistics like it. It's important that we realize that what our children have access to is not the kind of stuff that we might have had access to when we were kids. It's exponentially worse. And so we have to start talking with our children at a very young age about how to handle these things. We talk about this in my family, even with Timothy. He's my kindergartner. And I'll say to him, Timmy, what would you do if somebody showed you a video of naked people? Dad, why would anybody show me? He laughs, he giggles. No, Timmy, that could happen. Somebody might show you a video of naked people. Well, he kind of laughs again. Why? People do things they shouldn't do. Let's practice what you would do. And I have the phone out. I say, okay, first thing, look away. We practice. Look away. Walk away. Now go find an adult. I think that kind of thing is really important with our kids, because the most common way that a child is exposed to pornography is through an older sibling or friend. Some of you may already have stories. I do in my extended family. I know of a child that was at the playground. That's exactly what happened. We need to prepare them, as horrible as it is, for what to do in that situation, so that hopefully they will come and feel empowered to talk to us and not feel like this was something that mom and dad don't know anything about. So we want to prepare ahead of time to think about that kind of thing. We talked a little bit about communication, and it just can't replace face-to-face. FaceTime is probably the most intimate form of communication there is on a device. But even with FaceTime, do you know you can never make eye contact? You're either looking at the little hole that is the camera, or you're looking at the screen, but you can't make eye contact. It just can't replace what we experience when we're in the room with another person. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it can't replace what we're already doing. And that brings us into creating. And at this point, I'm going to ask Mrs. O'Byrne to talk to us a little bit about what she's seeing in elementary and how we can be creative with technology.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, I have been screening 4 and 5-year-olds for entrance into LCS for 14 years, so probably over 2,000 screenings. And what I've seen over the years is that at this time, I would say we're in a bit of a crisis, to be honest. What we're seeing is a decline in the ability for children to, not all, of course, but I'm just seeing an increase, okay, of kids. They have trouble coloring. They have trouble really playing independently, okay? So it really is interesting when they come in and they complete the screening with me. I watch them for a little while, and I just want to see them play, right? I just purposely prepare a little area, let them play for a little while and observe. And what really breaks my heart is that I'm seeing a decline in that ability to just sit and create. Sit and play and pretend, right? You remember all the times maybe when you were growing up and you were able to build with the blocks and make a little garage for the cars and sit and maybe have a tea party with some, and play with a baby doll. And, all of these things we're seeing a decline in. Even in K4, we purposely spend more time. We're having to teach kids how to play. That's just, I didn't think I would see that. I'm not that old, but, so that's something that I want to encourage you, especially as, Chris and I have sent one off to college now, and we have Cameron's in 10th grade, but with Taylor leaving, you really look back and you try to think, man, what would we have done differently? We messed up plenty of times. But I'll tell you, the things that I miss, that I encourage you to spend time doing is going on walks. Go on, I call it a walk and talk. That way you don't take your phone with you. And just talk with your kids. Walk around Lake Hollingsworth, walk around the backyard and look at God's creation and just ask them questions and get them talking with you. That is the great way to increase vocabulary and just that communication. encourage tons and tons of coloring, right? We want 1,000 miles. A lot of you have heard me say that over the years. But we want 1,000 miles of fine motor. Can you imagine coloring 1,000 miles? Okay, that can also be incorporate like Legos, sticker books. So a lot of you, did any of your kids bring home the wiki sticks? I don't know if you saw those, but I went to each classroom, I gave the kids wiki sticks, and they're this cool wax that you can pull off and you can create things with it, right? So we need to, that's helping the fine motor, but it's helping them be creative and not be stuck to a screen, okay? So I gave them, I don't know if any of them shared with you the Auburn challenge, but I had them, I said, all right guys, here's the challenge. And I actually had some parents send me a picture of what they chose to do, but I challenged them, I said, go home tonight and resist. And I made it this fun thing, you want to resist technology for tonight. See what else you can do with your parents. You can cook with them, you can read with them, you can go on a walk and color and all this stuff. So some of them took pictures and sent it to me, it was really sweet. But I also encouraged them to make this bag or box or whatnot, a survival box. And we called it this fun, in your car, go ahead and make a survival bag and have your parents put stuff in it, or you choose things and put stuff in it. So if you're waiting at the doctor's office or you are waiting at a restaurant for a long time, instead of asking mom or dad for their phone, ask for your survival bag and pull that out with the little Lego guys or the little Matchbox car, or whatever, would entertain them for a while. Little thing of Play-Doh, whatever. The wiki sticks, So that's something that we've been talking a lot on our side too, because we know hopefully it's going to help you, right? So if we're educating the kids from our side and we're giving them ideas and options, then hopefully it'll make your job a little bit easier when you can play that card of, what Mrs. O'Byrne said, but and what your teachers are teaching you. So yes, and Jeff's right, technology isn't bad. It's not that, but we want to make sure developmentally that it's not taking over their life. Because we, on this green sheet, on this sheet with the green banner, Heather and I stayed one night a couple weeks ago and made this, but it's really just some ideas of different things that you can do at home. Legos, puzzles, all that fun stuff with your kids. The main thing a couple things. So Cameron's in 10th grade. He, this is years ago. Oh my goodness, some of you know my mom, JoJo, right? Some of you know her, some of you don't, but JoJo can be, like how do I say it nicely, but she's very sweet, right? She's incredible, but she can be very strong-willed too. That's probably the way I am too, so we'll just be real. So, but she got our kids a Christmas present when they were, oh my goodness, probably 7 and 10, something like that. I need to tell you first, my husband, Chris, he had a rule that they would play no video games, right? No video games until they read well. So I always ask them, so what is reading well? Where are we at with that? Because I struggled, even though as an educator, I can put one hat on, right? But as a mom, you sort of do want to give in sometimes, right? Like, I just need some peace for a few minutes. Let me take a shower, go to the bathroom. So I was always tempted to give them a video game to just pacify them for a little while. Being honest, right? So, but my husband was very, very, he was not going to budge. This was not happening in our house. And thankfully, I listened, and I respected him. It was hard, but I did respect him. And so anyway, this Christmas Day, my mom and dad come over, and they had these presents. And I wasn't sure what they were, but I could imagine. And my kids open them up, and Cameron and Taylor see remember the little Nintendo game handheld things? I forget what they're called, but they had little what were they called? Game Boy type things or whatever. So I went, oh boy. Christmas morning in the O'Byrne household, right? So I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. And somehow Chris just contained himself. He just sat patiently. After everybody left, he walked over, scooped him up, took him to the bedroom. I'm like, okay. So I'm not sure whatever happened to the games, but they did not end up in our kids' hands. So now, looking back, even though that was hard, right? Looking back, I'm so thankful because they gave them opportunities to do other things, and they're reading well, and everything's great, But so that was hard sometimes. But I would, if you are as a family decide that video games is something that you want your kids to partake in, then I would encourage you to have them earn the time. So, Cameron, we had to do this a lot, not even with the video games, but more with technology. Just any technology. He wanted to get online and watch some whatever, so we would say, you know what, read for 30 minutes, and you can do that for 30 minutes. Or you can change that according to your child, right? Sometimes you may want to go, okay, you read for 15 minutes and we'll give you 30, or read for 15 and we'll give you 5. I don't know what your family would decide, but some kind of earning that technology time. Right now we have a couple of rules that they don't take devices in their bedrooms. So no technology in the bedrooms. It has to stay in a common space. We have an island in our kitchen. That's where most of their homework is done, or at a desk near there. They're fine to do math and that kind of thing in their room if they don't need the technology. I don't care, lay on your bed, do your math. But if they need technology, then they're out in a common space. And it's funny, we have an island here, and Cameron usually does his work there. And so I purposely, I'm doing the dishes, and I'll just walk by every now and then, take a quick peek, when he's on, and then just walk over, do some laundry, walk back. So you're able to just walk by and take that quick peek. I know that sounds like, oh, Lucy, you don't trust your kids? What is up? I'm like, nope. Nope. But I know that, I think that we have a responsibility, just to hold them accountable and keep the boundaries in, but every child's different. But, I would just encourage you to talk as a family on what you feel like the boundaries should be for your family. And then on this next sheet is this blue sheet. This is a summary of the technology that we use in elementary. And we did this because we wanted to make sure and confirm how much we're expecting our students to be on devices. Are we talking out of us, or are we saying, no, don't get on the device, but then here we're telling you, yes, they have to do this every night, So we wanted to look at that at developmental stages and see, is it appropriate? And I'm glad we did that, and really, most of the kids, we're talking, kindergarten, 20 minutes a week. So they're not addicted, And then up through the grade levels, you can see it gets up to about an hour for the whole week. So we felt like that was pretty reasonable, and that it can be used for good things too. But so I hope that helps. Jeff has a couple more things that he's going to wrap up with.
Yeah, so some of you have students in 5th grade, and you'll be upcoming soon. We'll have the 5th grade parent meeting. But I did just want to make one quick comment about where we're moving at LCS with technology. As they move into middle school, we do have them purchase an iPad that they use. And just a couple of quick things. The phone and the iPad really are different devices. And I know they do all the same things, but they're used in different ways. So I walked around and asked high school students in just kind of a straw poll, how do you use the iPad versus the phone? Bottom line was that they're not using their iPad for a lot of sneaky stuff. It's hard to cheat with an iPad. It's hard to take pictures with an iPad that maybe you shouldn't be taking. And especially if you follow what we would ask is that if you do purchase an iPad, I know some of you may have already done that, if you would get the model that is Wi-Fi only and that doesn't have data, that is a huge help to us as a school. That forces them to be on our network with our filters, and we can regulate what's going on there. If they have a data plan with their iPad, that makes it much more difficult for us. So if you haven't made that decision yet, be thinking about that, and realize that here's kind of what I was told over and over again by students. Well, the iPad's for school, the phone is for my personal stuff. And if you think about it, it's really true. Our phone doesn't really leave our person. It stays right next to us. The iPad is in a backpack, and our teachers, you'll hear more about this in the 5th grade parent meeting, but our teachers really do keep the iPads away until we're taking them out to use them. And that's important as well. You'll hear more about that, like I said. Also, we're going to be producing a series of videos for iOS that show you how to use all of the parental controls. And so I know there's a lot of powerful things that are available now on the current iOS. My son's iPad goes to sleep at 9 o'clock every night. It wakes up at 7. During that time, it's asleep. He can't use it. And I can do that from my phone. Many of you probably already figured that out, but we'll put some videos out there. In fact, today I found something I didn't know. I thought that Apple had taken away the ability to remove texting from an iPad. They haven't. You can actually take that away if you want to. There's a way to do that, and we'll get that information to you as well. Last couple of things here. I think what we need is we need wisdom and we need courage. Wisdom in the sense that this has happened quickly, and some of us have maybe gone down the road a little further than we wanted to without really reflecting on it. So we may have to go back and figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And that's, again, where we need each other. I tell you, there's something powerful about speaking to each other about this, because one of the things I've seen in the other meetings is parents going, I thought I was the only one who was concerned about this. I'm not. And so you need to talk with your other parents around you so that there are some common expectations. You know, if someone's going over to someone's house, what can we expect? And that's not an intrusive question. That's a wisdom question. Lucy talked about trusting your children. I think in our homes, we need to create a whole environment of all of us can make mistakes with technology. And I let my children know, my wife she has free reign with all my technology. She can see my passwords. She can look at whatever I want. And I have a good friend that we talk about these things. And he'll look me in the eye and say, hey, what have you been looking at? That's important. I tell my children that. So there's a culture of, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that sin is in this world, and we get a chance to talk about temptation. We're all tempted. And so it's not because I don't trust you. It's because I love you. And then the other thing, so often the reason that we hand our kid a device maybe before we really wanted to was because we want them to be safe. Just remember that the thing you're handing them is very dangerous. So we have to make that decision. You know, I want to be able to get in touch with you, but the thing I'm handing you is also very dangerous. So how can I set this up in such a way that you're kept safe in the middle of this? And your kids are going to say, look, I'm the only one with these kinds. Anybody's kid ever say that? I'm the only one with these kinds of rules. Okay, first of all, it's not true, right? And then second of all, yeah, but you're my child. And I love you, and I'm going to have to make the rules for our family. They may look different than other families, and that's okay. That's okay. And so we have to learn how to move past those kinds of tricks that we pulled on our parents. By the way, one other thing, our parents haven't gone through this, but they do know what it's like to keep a kid entertained without a device. I thought about that. I'm like, man, we went on a lot of trips. How did you do that? Ask your parents about that, or older people in your church or wherever. What did you guys do when we were young? Because, man, it's hard. It's really hard. And they'll be able to tell you some of those things. In conclusion, I want to give you a few resources that you might be interested in. One that I really want to highlight is over here, this group study. We did this as a faculty, a fantastic study that works through the issues of technology, but many other things that we are facing in our culture today. And you can go online and just Google Christ-centered parenting if you can't read that. This is out of the ERLC, and it's a series of videos that you can purchase. It's over 6 weeks, and it's a fantastic group study. They walk through many different cultural issues that we're facing, and they do it by grade level. So what's a preschooler going to be facing? What's a lower elementary, upper elementary, middle schooler, high school, and even young adult? It's fantastic. And so I'd really commend that to you. Last year, our faculty read through the TechWise Family, also a very stimulating book on technology. Common Sense Media has all kinds of, this is not a Christian site, but it has all kinds of great devices for alternatives to screens and how to think through that. TED Talk there. And then also on the bottom right, this is the podcast that we produced last year. If you are interested in hearing kind of what's going on here at LCS, there are 4 episodes of that. It's Vantage at LCS, and you can check that out. Last thing, I would appreciate your feedback. By the way, thank you for coming out tonight. I know that this is, it's difficult in the middle of the week to carve out time to do that. We really appreciate your taking the time to do that, and we also really appreciate the fact that you've chosen to entrust your children to us. You could have your children in a lot of places, and so we take that very seriously, and that's why we're talking about these kinds of things. So I'd like a little bit of your feedback. I have a QR code up here. Those of you that have an iPhone, you open up your camera and just zoom in on that. It'll take you to a survey, and you can fill that out at your leisure. Also, I think Lucy will send that out again in an email tomorrow. So that's what we have tonight. Thank you again so much for coming. And please, we want to resource you. If you have questions, feel free to ask. And I'll hang out here for a little bit. Thanks for coming.